Welcome, nocturnal minds aboard. Your learning journey starts now. So, having navigated the intricate landscape of metaphysics and the enduring question of the soul, we now turn our gaze towards an even more profound enigma, the existence of God. But what exactly are we talking about when we say God? It's not just some superpowered human, right? The text nails it. We're looking for the absolute, that ultimate, self-contained reality, existing entirely on its own terms, no dependencies, no external determinants. It's like asking, does the ultimate independent entity exist? And how do we even begin to argue for such a thing? We'll focus on two main avenues: metaphysical arguments, digging into the nature of reality itself, and moral arguments, exploring the implications for ethics. Now, people have thrown around labels like a priori and a posteriori for these proofs. But honestly, most of the heavy lifting in proving God's existence comes from observing the world. That's a posteriori. Some tried splitting them further, metaphysical versus physical or moral proofs. But think about it. Can you really prove God just by staring at rocks and trees? Those physical observations need a deeper metaphysical foundation. So, let's cut through the noise. We're boiling it down to two core types: metaphysical proofs, which use reason's fundamental principles, ideas like perfection, causality, and purpose, to show why the relative world can't stand alone; and moral proofs, which tackle the question from the angle of right and wrong. This distinction is key, as we'll see. Let's kick things off with proofs based on perfection. Imagine you're judging athletes. You know there's a gold medal standard, even if you haven't seen it yourself. We all intuitively rank things as better or worse, more perfect or less. But where does this idea of absolute perfection come from? Aquinas and Descartes argued it must be innate. If we can measure imperfection against an ideal, that ideal must reside somewhere. And where better than within us? But how did we get this idea? They propose it must come from a perfect source, God. Descartes even threw in a principle: the cause must be at least as real as the effect. Okay, hold that thought. We'll scrutinize that later. Then there's the ontological argument, championed by Anselm, Descartes, and Leibniz. This one's a bit mind-bending. It starts with the concept of God as the greatest conceivable being. If God didn't exist, couldn't we imagine a greater being, one that does exist? Since we can't conceive of something greater than the greatest, God must exist. Descartes tweaked this, saying, existence itself is the prime perfection. If we have the idea of a perfect being and existence is necessary for perfection, then God must exist. Pretty neat, huh? Or is it? Next up, causality. Think Aristotle's famous domino effect. Everything that moves gets moved by something else. You push a ball, it rolls. What pushed you? Maybe your foot. What pushed your foot? Gravity, maybe. But if every cause needs another cause, where does the chain start? Aristotle called this the necessary stop, a first mover that isn't moved by anything else. Clarke took a slightly different tack, focusing on contingency. Stuff exists now, right? If everything that exists had a beginning, then something had to pop into existence without a cause. Ex nihilo nihil fit, nothing comes from nothing. That seems fishy, so something must have always existed. Could it be just a bunch of temporary things? No, because each temporary thing needs a cause, so the whole collection does too. Therefore, this eternal something must be God, an uncaused cause outside the chain of contingent events. The gist is, experience shows us causes explaining effects, but those causes themselves need explaining. An infinite loop of who caused whom doesn't make sense. So, there must be a starting point, a first cause that doesn't need a cause, and that's God. Alright, finality. This is about purpose or ends. There are two ways to approach this. One stays abstract. Reason naturally thinks in terms of goals. If we see a series of actions leading somewhere, there must be an end goal. Following these ends back, they must eventually lead to one ultimate purpose, God. The other approach looks at the world. Look at the complexity, the harmony, the way things fit together. Does it look like random chance? Or does it suggest design? Like finding a perfectly crafted watch, you might infer a watchmaker. This intelligence, this designer is God. Leibniz added a twist, using his principle of sufficient reason. At the very beginning, there were countless possible universes. Who picked the one we live in? Why this one and not another? This choice implies a will, an intelligence, a supreme being God, who chose the best possible world. It's all about finding purpose in the cosmos. Okay, so we've heard these metaphysical arguments. But are they solid? Kant threw a massive wrench in the works. His big idea was that reason is great for organizing our experiences, like sorting sensory data into coherent patterns. But trying to use reason to prove the existence of something beyond experience, like God, is a category error. It's like using a hammer to solve a math problem. Let's apply this critique. The perfection argument relies on that shaky principle, cause equals effect in reality. Think about water forming from hydrogen and oxygen. The water is real, but it's a totally different kind of reality than the gases. Causes don't necessarily dictate the exact same type of effect. Plus, it assumes our ideas come directly from external objects, which the text already argues against. The ontological argument? Leibniz pointed out a flaw. You first need to prove a perfect being is even logically possible before you can conclude it exists. Kant hit harder. Is existence really a perfection? Saying a perfect unicorn exists doesn't make unicorns more perfect, just more real. And syllogisms, those logical chains, are great for analyzing concepts, but they can't create new facts. They can only show possibility, not actuality. So deducing existence from a definition doesn't quite work. What about causality? Does the principle of cause and effect really demand a first uncaused cause? Kant says no, actually positing a first cause breaks the causal chain, as it has no cause. Self-causation? That sounds like magic, violating the basic idea of distinct cause and effect. However, the text offers a slight twist. Combine causality with the principle of number. If everything is made of a finite number of parts, the chain of causes must be finite and have a limit. But trying to grasp this limit using the same causal logic we use for everyday things leads to paradoxes. So, we know there's a limit, but what it is remains mysterious through this route. Finally, finality. Why must all the purposes in the universe converge on one single, ultimate goal? Couldn't there be lots of smaller systems, each with its own purpose? If so, we're back to square one, not reaching the absolute. And even if there is one ultimate end, why must it be God, outside of everything else? Couldn't humanity itself be the ultimate purpose, making the finality immanent within the world? That wouldn't get us to the transcendent God we're seeking. So the argument from finality also falls short. Okay, metaphysics seems shaky. Let's try a different angle, physico-theology, or the argument from design. Kant summarized it nicely. First, observe the universe, it's ordered, harmonious. Second, this order isn't baked into the fabric of reality, it's contingent, it could be otherwise. Third, therefore, this order must have been imposed by a knowing intelligence, acting freely, not just blindly following rules. Fourth, the way everything fits together suggests a single overarching intelligence, like an artist designing a masterpiece. The first step, noticing order in the cosmos, most folks agree on. But the second step, that this order is accidental, not necessary, that's where the debate heats up. Some argue the universe is just fundamentally ordered. Enter Epicurus, throwing cold water on the design argument. He said, "Hold on, maybe it's not intelligence, maybe it's just dumb luck." His idea was that atoms aren't just mindlessly bumping into each other. They have a tiny bit of freedom. Over infinite time and infinite possible combinations, eventually by chance, the atoms arrange themselves into the stable, ordered world we see. Cicero shot back, "Are you kidding me? Chance writing the Iliad? The odds seem astronomical." Epicurus replied, "Think bigger. With infinite time and possibilities, eventually the right combination happens and sticks around because it's stable. But what makes it stable? Why this specific arrangement and not chaos?" Epicurus didn't give a great answer. His chance explanation felt too hand-wavy, too much like saying gods did it but with less dignity. So while elegant in theory, Epicureanism didn't really stick. Then came mechanism and its modern champion, evolutionism, particularly Spencer's version. Mechanists basically said, no need for a designer, things just work out. The eye sees light because light shaped the eye, a deterministic process. Spencer tried to explain the two kinds of order finalists pointed out. Things naturally tend towards stability, and anything not adapted is doomed. Coordination within organisms, segregation. When mixed elements face a force, they sort themselves out, grouping similar things together, creating order. Sounds plausible, right? But wait. How does adaptation explain the need for specific organs? Did the need for movement magically create legs? Or did leg blueprints just lie dormant? And segregation explains physical sorting. But does it capture the complex hierarchical organization within a living being? Evolutionism is great at showing how means and ends fit together, but it doesn't fully kill the idea of purpose. In fact, explaining evolution itself might require appealing to some underlying principle or direction, a hint of finality sneaking back in. So we have order, and we suspect an external intelligence designed it. But hold on, couldn't this purpose be internal? like instincts guiding animals. Aristotle, Hegel, Hartmann, Schopenhauer proposed immanent finality, the idea that things inherently strive towards their goals, like seeds growing into trees. This avoids making God too much like us humans. But the text argues this just swaps anthropomorphism for zoomorphism, making God like an animal instinct. The bigger problem: how can there be purpose without consciousness? If conception requires a mind and we deny a conscious God, we're stuck. So transcendent finality, God as an external conscious intelligence, seems necessary. But Kant still wasn't convinced. He said this argument proves a world architect, someone who imposes form, but not a creator who brings matter into being. More importantly, the argument starts with limited, imperfect order we observe, and jumps to a perfect, all-powerful God. That's a leap too far. Experience only gives us hints of order, not the blueprint for an infinitely perfect creator. So physico-theology gets us partway, a designer, but not all the way to the full God. Alright, metaphysics and design arguments seem weak. Let's switch gears to moral proofs. First, the easy one: everyone believes in God, so he must exist. Cicero suggested this, but does everyone believe? Probably not. Even if they did, does popular opinion equal truth? Remember, history is full of widely held beliefs that were wrong. So universal agreement is flimsy evidence. The second moral argument is stronger, linking God to morality itself. Think about it. Why do we feel obligated to follow moral rules? An abstract rule book doesn't compel us. Obligation comes from someone, so the moral law, to be obligatory, must be backed by a living authority, a source. That source, the argument claims, is God. The moral law is God himself. Secondly, consider moral sanction, the idea that good deeds should lead to good outcomes, and vice versa. We don't see perfect harmony between virtue and reward here on earth. For this harmony to exist perhaps in an afterlife, there needs to be a guarantor, a cause ensuring justice prevails. And who's that again? God. So God appears both as the moral lawgiver and the necessary condition for moral justice. So, let's recap our journey through these proofs. The metaphysical arguments, relying on perfection, causality, and finality, crumbled under scrutiny. The physico-theological argument, pointing to a designer, gave us an architect but not the full picture of an infinitely perfect God. But the moral arguments, linking God to obligation and justice, seem to hold more water. Individually, they might not be knockdown proofs, but taken together, they paint a compelling picture. Even if metaphysics struggles, the demands of morality seem to point towards a necessary transcendent source, the absolute, which we defined as God. It's like gathering threads from different directions. None alone make a perfect tapestry, but together they strongly suggest the existence of the weaver. Okay, we've argued God exists, great. Now, what is God like? What are his attributes? How do we figure this out? One approach is analogy. Take human qualities like wisdom, power, goodness, and just crank them up to perfection and call that God. But the text rightly rejects this. It echoes the earlier critique. It relies on flawed principles and risks making God seem like a superpowered human, diminishing his uniqueness. So, we need a better method. The chosen path is deduction. Start with our definition of God, the absolute, the self-sufficient reality, and logically deduce what must be true about such a being. Let's see what follows. So what does it mean to be the absolute? First, infinity. If God were limited, finite, then whatever limited him would be more fundamental, making him relative. So God must be unlimited. Second, unity. If God were made of parts, those parts would define him, making him relative to them. Since he's absolute, he must be one indivisible whole. Third, perfection. Not a checklist of all possible good qualities, because those are relative. Perfection here means absolute sufficiency, self-completeness. It's the state of being the absolute. Fourth, immutability. Change happens in the realm of the relative, caused by external factors. God, being absolute, has no external cause and cannot change himself. He is eternally the same. Fifth, immensity. Where is God? Not in space, that doesn't make sense. Not outside space, that's even weirder. Since space involves location and limits and God is absolute, he transcends spatial dimensions. Sixth, eternity. Same logic applies to time. Time involves sequence, past, present, future. God, being outside the relative world, is timeless. For him there is no becoming, he simply is. Now for the moral attributes. These are trickier, because we tend to think of morality in human terms. But remember, we linked God to the source of moral obligation and justice. So for God to judge us perfectly, knowing every cause and effect of our actions, he must be omniscient. To carry out those judgments and shape the world according to moral law, he must be omnipotent. To be fair and just, he must be perfectly impartial. And his freedom isn't just a choice, but a necessary consequence of his absolute nature. No external forces can compel him. These attributes, omniscience, omnipotence, impartiality, freedom, collectively give us the sense of a divine personality. Some worry this clashes with the metaphysical attributes like infinity and immutability. But the text argues no contradiction if we understand infinity as boundless knowledge or power, not endless space, and perfection as absolute self-sufficiency, not just a collection of traits. In fact, the ideal of a perfect person is precisely the absolute. So, personality and absoluteness aren't opposed here. We've established God exists and described his nature. Now, the crucial question: how does God relate to the world we inhabit? Most agree he's the cause. But what does that mean practically? How does the absolute interact with the relative? Let's look at alternatives. Dualism suggests God didn't create everything from scratch. He just took pre-existing matter and organized it. Think Plato's receptacle or Aristotle's prime matter. But the text argues this fails. If matter existed eternally alongside God, it would be another absolute, limiting God's power. Plus, wouldn't matter have its own rules, constraining God's creative freedom? Then there's pantheism. The universe is God. Everything is just manifestations of a single divine substance. Stoics saw it as material, Hegel spiritual, Spinoza both thinking and extended substance. But pantheism faces big hurdles. First, what is this God? If it's both material and spiritual, is it coherent? Second, where are individuals? If we're just fleeting moments in God's grand play, where's our unique identity, our freedom? We feel free and distinct. Third, how do you explain change and multiplicity? If God is the only reality, unchanging, how do we get the dynamic, diverse world of sensations and movements? Pantheism risks collapsing into monism, denying the very diversity we experience. So neither dualism nor pantheism seem to fit. So if not dualism or pantheism, what is it? The conclusion is creation. God brought the world into existence from nothing, distinct from it, and more than just a mere architect. Trying to grasp what creation means is futile, it defies our understanding. But importantly, the relationship doesn't end at creation. The world can't be abandoned. This ongoing connection is providence. There are two flavors. Particular providence means God constantly micromanages everything, pulling strings behind the scenes. Bossuet wrote about this. But the text argues this undermines human freedom and makes God seem less majestic, like a cosmic puppeteer. Philosophy can't accept irreconcilable contradictions. So we reject particular providence. Instead, we embrace general providence. God set up the best possible system at the beginning by establishing universal laws. He then maintains these laws, allowing the world to run according to his plan. This reflects his wisdom and goodness, providing a framework for order and potential flourishing. But here's the elephant in the room: evil. If God is all good and all powerful, why is there so much suffering and wrongdoing? The scholastics famously asked, Si Deus et unde malum. Leibniz offered a response, his theodicy. He argued God didn't just create any possible world, but chose the best possible world from an infinite array of options. Evil, then, isn't something God actively created, but a necessary part of the best possible scenario. He distinguished three types. Metaphysical evil is simply imperfection, the fact that finite beings like us aren't perfect. Moral evil, sin, arises because true moral goodness requires free will, and we can only choose freely if we have the power to choose wrongly. Physical evil, suffering, seems bad, but Leibniz claimed it serves greater goods. Maybe individual suffering is necessary for the world's existence, or it's a tough school that tempers the soul and teaches valuable lessons. Evil, from this view, is like a necessary ingredient in a complex recipe for the best possible outcome. Of course, Leibniz's optimism faced challenges, especially from pessimists like Schopenhauer and Hartmann. Their view is more psychological. Life is fundamentally miserable. Schopenhauer famously declared pleasure is just the absence of pain. Pain is the true baseline state. Hartmann agreed pain dominates, lasting longer and being more intense than fleeting pleasures. He even suggested life's purpose is driven by some unconscious force tricking us into seeking pleasure, which ultimately serves nature's ends, not ours. But the text pushes back. First, pleasure isn't an objective measurement, it's subjective. Hartmann's personal ledger doesn't apply universally. Can we really quantify pain versus pleasure like weights on a scale? Second, if pleasure is fleeting, why isn't pain equally transient? Memory and hope can make pleasure linger, even if brief. And Hartmann's claim about lingering pain seems debatable. Hartman's conclusion that pleasure never compensates for pain is just opinion. Many people find joy deeply rewarding, worth enduring discomfort. The text argues pessimism overlooks the possibility of genuine happiness and frames it as an art to be cultivated, not a lost cause. Don't throw in the towel just yet. So, wrapping up this exploration, we've journeyed through the arguments for God's existence, found the metaphysical ones wanting, but seen the moral arguments offer significant support. We've sketched God's nature as the absolute, possessing both metaphysical traits like infinity and immutability, and moral ones like omniscience and justice. We've examined the relationship, concluding in creation and general providence, rejecting both neglect and micromanagement. And finally, we've tackled the problem of evil, finding Leibniz's optimistic response, while perhaps not satisfying everyone, provides a framework for understanding suffering within a benevolent divine plan, countering the tide of pessimism. It's a complex picture, but one that, according to this text, offers a rational basis for belief in the absolute.